Important points of Chapter 3. When Europeans explored Canada, they found all regions occupied by native peoples they called Indians, because the first explorers thought they had reached the East Indies. The Iroquois were farmers and hunters. The Cree and Dene of the Northwest were hunter-gatherers. The Sioux were nomadic, following the bison, buffalo, herd. The Inuit lived off Arctic wildlife. Large numbers of Aboriginals died of European diseases to which they lacked immunity. The remains of their settlement, the Vikings from Iceland who colonized Greenland 1,000 years ago, L'Anse aux Meadows, are a World Heritage Site. European exploration began in earnest in 1497 with the expedition of John Cabot, who was the first to draw a map of Canada's east coast. Between 1534 and 1542, Jacques Cartier made 3 voyages across the Atlantic, claiming the land for King Francis I of France. Cartier heard 2 captured guides speak the Iroquoian word Canada, meaning village. By the 1550s, the name of Canada began appearing on maps. In 1604, the first European settlement north of Florida was established by French explorers Pierre de Monts and Samuel de Champlain, first on St. Croix Island, in present-day Maine, then at Port Royal, in Acadia, present-day Nova Scotia. In 1608 Champlain built a fortress at what is now Quebec City. The colonists struggled against a harsh climate. Champlain allied the colony with the Algonquin, Montagnais, and Huron, historic enemies of the Iroquois, a confederation of 5, later 6, First Nations who battled with the French settlements for a century. The French and the Iroquois made peace in 1701. In 1670, King Charles II of England granted the Hudson's Bay Company exclusive trading rights over the watershed draining into Hudson Bay. The skilled and courageous men who traveled by canoe were called voyageurs and coureurs de bois, and formed strong alliances with First Nations. In 1759, the British defeated the French in the Battle of the Plains of Abraham at Quebec City, marking the end of France's empire in America. The commanders of both armies, Brigadier James Wolfe and the Marquis de Montcalm, were killed leading their troops in battle. Following the war, Great Britain renamed the colony the Province of Quebec. To better govern the French Roman Catholic majority, the British Parliament passed the Quebec Act of 1774. One of the constitutional foundations of Canada, the Quebec Act accommodated the principles of British institutions to the reality of the province. The Quebec Act restored French civil law while maintaining British criminal law. In 1776, the 13 British colonies to the south of Quebec declared independence and formed the United States. More than 40,000 people loyal to the Crown, called Loyalists, fled the oppression of the American Revolution to settle in Nova Scotia and Quebec. Joseph Brant led thousands of Loyalist Mohawk Indians into Canada. About 3,000 black Loyalists, freedmen and slaves came north seeking a better life. In 1792, some black Nova Scotians, who were given poor land, moved on to establish Freetown, Sierra Leone, West Africa, a new British colony for freed slaves. The first representative assembly was elected in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in 1758. Prince Edward Island followed in 1773, New Brunswick in 1785. The Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the province of Quebec into Upper Canada, later Ontario, which was mainly Loyalist, Protestant and English-speaking, and Lower Canada, later Quebec, heavily Catholic and French-speaking. The Act also granted to the Canadas, for the first time, legislative assemblies elected by the people. The name Canada also became official at this time and has been used ever since. The Atlantic colonies and the 2 Canadas were known collectively as British North America. In 1793, Upper Canada, led by Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe, a Loyalist military officer, became the first province in the Empire to move toward abolition. In 1807, the British Parliament prohibited the buying and selling of slaves, and in 1833 abolished slavery throughout the empire. Thousands of slaves escaped from the United States, followed the North Star and settled in Canada via the Underground Railroad, a Christian anti-slavery network. The Montreal Stock Exchange opened in 1832. After the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte's fleet in the Battle of Trafalgar, 1805, the Royal Navy ruled the waves. The United States launched an invasion in June 1812. Canadian volunteers and First Nations, including Shawnee led by Chief Tecumseh, supported British soldiers in Canada's defense. In 1813, Lieutenant Colonel Charles de Salaberry and 460 soldiers, mostly French Canadians, turned back 4,000 American invaders at Châteauguay, south of Montreal. In 1813, the Americans burned Government House and the Parliament buildings in York, now Toronto. In retaliation in 1814, Major General Robert Ross led an expedition from Nova Scotia that burned down the White House and other public buildings in Washington, D.C. The Duke of Wellington sent some of his best soldiers to defend Canada in 1814. He then chose Bytown, Ottawa, as the endpoint of the Rideau Canal, part of a network of forts to prevent the USA from invading Canada again. Wellington, who defeated Napoleon in 1815, therefore played a direct role in founding the national capital. In 1813, Laura Secord, pioneer wife and mother of 5 children, made a dangerous 19-mile 30 kilometers journey on foot to warn Lieutenant James Fitzgibbon of a planned American attack. Her bravery contributed to victory at the Battle of Beaver Dams. The Fathers of Confederation established the Dominion of Canada on July 1, 1867, the birth of the country that we know today. In 1840, Upper and Lower Canada were united as the Province of Canada. The first British North American colony to attain full responsible government was Nova Scotia in 1847-48. In 1848-49, the Governor of United Canada, Lord Elgin, with encouragement from London, introduced responsible government. La Fontaine, a champion of democracy and French language rights, became the first leader of a responsible government in the Canadas. The British Parliament passed the British North America Act in 1867. The Dominion of Canada was officially born on July 1, 1867. Until 1982, July 1 was celebrated as Dominion Day to commemorate the day that Canada became a self-governing dominion. Today it is officially known as Canada Day. Sir Leonard Tilley, an elected official and father of Confederation from New Brunswick, suggested the term Dominion of Canada in 1864. Expansion of the Dominion. 1867, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. 1870, Manitoba, Northwest Territories. 1871, British Columbia. 1873, Prince Edward Island. 1880, transfer of the Arctic Islands to NWT. 1898, Yukon Territory. 1905, Alberta, Saskatchewan. 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador. 1999, Nunavut. In 1867, Sir John Alexander Macdonald, born in Scotland on January 11, 1815, a father of Confederation, became Canada's first Prime Minister. Parliament has recognized January 11 as Sir John A. Macdonald Day. His portrait is on the $10 bill. Sir Georges-Étienne Cartier was the key architect of Confederation from Quebec. Cartier led Quebec into Confederation and helped negotiate the entry of the Northwest Territories, Manitoba, and British Columbia into Canada. When Canada took over the vast Northwest region from the Hudson's Bay Company in 1869, the 12,000 Métis of the Red River were not consulted. Louis Riel led an armed uprising and seized Fort Garry, the territorial capital. Ottawa sent soldiers to retake Fort Garry in 1870. Riel fled to the United States and Canada established a new province, Manitoba. A second rebellion in 1885 in present-day Saskatchewan led to Riel's trial and execution for high treason, a decision that was strongly opposed in Quebec. Riel is seen by many as a hero, a defender of Métis rights and the father of Manitoba. Prime Minister MacDonald established the Northwest Mounted Police, NWMP, in 1873. The NWMP founded Fort Calgary, Fort Macleod, and other centers that today are cities and towns. Regina became its headquarters. Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP or the Mounties, are the national police force and one of Canada's best-known symbols. Major General Sir Sam Steele came from the ranks of the Mounties. British Columbia joined Canada in 1871 after Ottawa promised to build a railway to the west coast. On November 7, 1885, a powerful symbol of unity was completed when Donald Smith, Lord Strathcona, the Scottish-born director of the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, drove the last spike. The Government of Canada apologized in 2006 from Chinese because were subject to discrimination, including the head tax, a race-based entry fee after the completion of railway. Sir Wilfrid Laurier became the first French-Canadian Prime Minister since Confederation and encouraged immigration to the West. Over 7,000 Canadians volunteered to fight in the South African War, 1899 to 1902, popularly known as the Boer War, and over 260 died. In 1900, Canadians took part in the battles of Paardeberg, Horse Mountain, and Lillefontaine, victories that strengthened national pride in Canada. When Germany attacked Belgium and France in 1914 and Britain declared war, Ottawa formed the Canadian Expeditionary Force, later the Canadian Corps. The Canadian Corps captured Vimy Ridge in April 1917, with 10,000 killed or wounded, securing the Canadians' reputation for valor as the shock troops of the British Empire. April 9 is celebrated as Vimy Day. The war ended in the armistice on November 11, 1918. The effort by women to achieve the right to vote is known as the women's suffrage movement. Its founder in Canada was Dr. Emily Stowe, the first Canadian woman to practice medicine in Canada. In 1916, Manitoba became the first province to grant voting rights to women. In 1917, the federal government of Sir Robert Borden gave women the right to vote in federal elections. In 1918, most Canadian female citizens aged 21 and over were granted the right to vote in federal elections. In 1921, Agnes MacPhail, a farmer and teacher, became the first woman MP. Due to the work of Therese Casgrain and others, Quebec granted women the vote in 1940. More than 3,000 nurses, nicknamed Bluebirds, served in the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, 2,500 of them overseas. November 11 is the Remembrance Day. Canadians wear the red poppy and observe a moment of silence at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month to honor the sacrifices of over 1 million brave men and women who have served, and the 110,000 who have given their lives. Canadian Medical Officer Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae composed the poem In Flanders Fields in 1915. It is often recited on Remembrance Day. The stock market crash of 1929, however, led to the Great Depression or the Dirty Thirties. The Bank of Canada, a central bank to manage the money supply and bring stability to the financial system, was created in 1934. Phil Edwards was a Canadian track and field champion. Born in British Guiana, he won bronze medals for Canada in the 1928, 1932, and 1936 Olympics, then graduated from McGill University Medical School. He served as a captain in the Canadian Army during the Second World War and, as a Montreal doctor, became an expert in tropical diseases. Canadians took part in the liberation of Italy in 1943-44. In the epic invasion of Normandy in northern France on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, 15,000 Canadian troops stormed and captured Juno Beach from the German army. The Canadian Army liberated the Netherlands in 1944-45 and helped force the German surrender of May 8, 1945, bringing to an end 6 years of war in Europe. The Second World War began in 1939. The Canadians fought bravely and suffered losses in the unsuccessful defense of Hong Kong, 1941, from attack by Imperial Japan, and in a failed raid on Nazi-controlled Dieppe on the coast of France, 1942. Japan surrendered on August 14, 1945, the end of 4 years of war in the Pacific. The Government of Canada apologized to Canadians of Japanese origin in 1988 for wartime wrongs and compensated the victims.